Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking your time to watch my videos. This video is going to mark the last video for the 100 block section of videos that I'm doing. I initially did a video call for contributions for I think 136 through 139, the beginning of book 2. I began with 140, and now this is going to take us, these notes will take us from 231 to 240. So I've gone from 140 to 240. I've done 100 notes, worth 100 notes, 100 of Nietzsche's notes within my notes, and I've presented in the video on 100 notes. It's about 12 hours worth of video that I've presented within the span of this week, and the last bit will be these notes that I'm giving now, the section 8.7 in your notes. It begins on page 239. What I'll do is, after I finish this, I'm definitely going to have a call for video contribution, which I'll shoot right after I do this hour worth of lecture, or so, hour and a half worth of lecture. There will be a video call for contributions, specifically for members within the theistic community to critique and attack Nietzsche and say why he's wrong. And I'll talk about that after this video. And then I won't post any more Nietzsche videos for about 2 to 3 weeks, because I'll be preparing the next block of 100 notes, which will take me to roughly about 340, 350. So right now we're about 25% the way through the book. There's about 1,000 and change notes, so we're roughly about 25% through the book, which isn't bad. And we're approaching the halfway point. There's 25 hours already of discussion, of lecture, and there's over, I would imagine, 150 videos already posted. I'll know exactly what number we are once I upload this and figure all this out. But progress is going nicely as usual. Alright, so with that, let's begin the last section of Nietzsche's Will to Power for this 100 note block, and this is going to take us from notes 231 to 240. So this is Will to Power, and this is section 8.7 in my notes, and it's notes 231 through 240 in Nietzsche. Okay, so to begin, Nietzsche talks about, and I have my book, Nietzsche talks about the bite of conscience, right? He talks about the bite of conscience. And we know earlier that Nietzsche denies the role of conscience, right? He says that conscience, I forget in which one of the lectures, but I've already presented on this, the role of conscience is manufactured by the sacerdotal class, by the priestly class, right? And what they do is they give you the impression that there's this sort of still, quiet voice within your head that helps you navigate the world and make distinctions between right and wrong actions, right? This idea that we have a conscience and that the conscience is inherent to humanity, according to Nietzsche, is absolutely false. Not only is it false, but Nietzsche denies the fact that we have a conscience, right? The conscience for Nietzsche is specifically conditioned and implanted and designed by the priestly class to make us conform to the moral law, right? That's the whole point for Nietzsche concerning the role of the conscience. The example that I gave to support Nietzsche in this claim, because it's a pretty huge claim, right? We want to believe that, yes, we know right from wrong, we can be taught right from wrong, such that when I get older and I'm confronted with a decision that I have to make, I can refer to my conscience, and my conscience will say, hey, you know, it's like the good angel, the bad angel type, right? My conscience will tell me, hey, you should do this action rather than this action, and it'll help navigate me through life. The point is, the decisions that I'm making, if it is the conscience that I'm referring to, Nietzsche says that conscience has been implanted by the sacerdotal class, and really all you're doing is making an appeal to the moral imperative. What he does as an immoralist is he does away with the conscience. He doesn't have, for all practical purposes, he doesn't have a conscience because he couldn't have a conscience, right? What we're going to recognize is an even more explicit discussion on the function that, for Nietzsche, the conscience has as a system of control. So we're going to talk about that now. And this is the bite of conscience. Okay, so the bite of conscience, and the question that is going to be asked is, what is the bite of conscience in Nietzsche, right? For Nietzsche, what is the bite of conscience? So for you who want to understand more of what Nietzsche is discussing, if you're using this pedagogically, this is a pretty good question to ask. This is a very technical question to ask. And by the end of this lecture, I will be successful if you can answer and understand this question, right? So I'm not going to give you the answer now, obviously, because we have to warm up and make sense of what the bite of conscience is. But the question is, what is the bite of conscience for Nietzsche? And I'm not going to write that down, so that's the question. Okay, so let's get to the answer, and then I'll flesh out and explain the answer in a bit. So, the bite of conscience for Nietzsche. For Nietzsche, the bite of conscience may result from a bad or evil action, or a good action. So basically, the first thing that we recognize is, and that's obviously not a full answer, this is just an approximation of the answer. The first part to understand with respect to the bite of conscience, and actually I probably will write it down, the bite of, right, the bite of conscience. The first thing that we need to recognize is that it pertains to actions. The types of actions that it may pertain to is an evil or bad action and a good action. We'll see that there's more emphasis in a second placed on, with respect to the bite of conscience, an evil or bad action rather than a good action. And this will make sense in a second. So just for now, just commit it to memory. When we're talking about the bite of conscience for Nietzsche, we know what conscience is, the ability to make assessments of right or wrong, sort of internally, quietly to ourselves. That condition, that ability is contingent on an act, so that the discourse on the bite of conscience takes place with respect to action. Okay, so for Nietzsche, the bite of conscience may result from bad act or good act. So we're talking about bite of conscience in terms of action. Now specifically, let's look at the bite of conscience for an evil act. Much later I'll talk about sort of how this relates to good action, but right now I just want to concentrate on evil because that's what he focuses on. And evil should be in scare quotes, but we'll get to that later. So the bite of conscience for a bad action. The bite of, and I did put it in scare quotes, of conscience for a bad action. Alright, so the bite of conscience for a bad action. First point, the term, the bite of conscience, as a term, is typically associated with the former, that is a bad action, right? So the first thing to recognize is that though the phrase, the bite of conscience refers to actions of both good and bad types, it typically refers to evil or bad actions, right? So it typically refers to bad actions. You can probably already guess that the idea of bad is in scare quotes because obviously Nietzsche is going to always, as always, challenge these sort of formulaic conceptions of what good is, what bad is, what evil is, what moral is, what immoral is, and so on, right? He's always challenging sort of these dichotomies, and he wants to say that it's not as clearly cut as you might think. Okay, so the term, the bad conscience, is typically associated with the former, that is, bad actions. First, Nietzsche describes the historical creation of the conscience as follows, and this comes from notes. This comes from note 141. So I've discussed this. This was 100 notes ago, right? And the reason why I did this is because I want to tie this in properly, right? So it's sort of the best way to really truly understand the text is to see how the author relates the same aspect, the same notions. In this sense, the notion, the conception of a conscience, how he relates that in various parts of the text. And